Amen. We are in Luke chapter 22. We're getting close to the crucifixion. Where we left off was Jesus praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, verses 39 through 46. We touched on this the last time we had class. Coming out, it says, he went to the Mount of Olives as he was accustomed, and his disciples also followed him. When he came to the place, he said to them, "Pray that you may not enter into temptation." And he was withdrawn from them about a stone's throw, and he knelt down and prayed, saying, "Father, if it is your will, take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done." Then an angel appeared to him from heaven, strengthening him. And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly. Then his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. And when he rose up from prayer and had come to the disciples, he found them sleeping from sorrow. Verse 46. Then he said to them, "Why do you sleep? Rise and pray, lest you enter into temptation." So we see here that Christ is praying, and it says he's praying in agony during this period of time in which he was on the earth. And we read from Hebrews chapter 5, the Hebrews writer actually talks about Jesus praying in the garden. Hebrews 5 and verse 7, the Hebrews writer says this, "Who in the days of his flesh, when he had offered up prayers and supplications with vehement cries and tears to him who was able to save him from death, and was heard because of his godly fear. Though he was a son, yet he learned obedience by the things which he suffered, and having been perfected, he became the author of eternal salvation to all who obey him." So we're told there that Christ prayed in agony and in distress. He told his disciples in verse 40, to pray that you may not enter temptation. One of the ways that we can fight temptation, and all of us face temptation, is through prayer. It's through prayer. And this is exactly what Jesus is telling them. Temptation is coming. Pray that you may not enter into it. Verse 41, he withdrew himself and he prayed. He knelt down. This is one of the many prayer postures that you find in the Bible. You can pray standing up, you can pray sitting down, you can kneel down. They lifted their hands before God and prayed. There were various ways to express a humility before God. And no one type of prayer posture is more holy or more will make your prayers any more powerful than the other. That's basically what I'm trying to say. Some seem to think that if you pray in a certain posture that it will intensify the prayer, and there's really nothing to that, but it does indicate in these different prayer postures humility before God and a bowing before God as a person would bow in humility before a king. Yes?
I was just thinking the comment that you made. I appreciate that observation. I think that it's so easy to forget, I guess, whenever you're in the moment of being tempted, that you forget to pray to God.
Mm-hmm.
And in thinking about that, I thought, how different would this world be if Adam and Eve actually tried to address God right there in that moment? I don't know how they would just call to God and say, we're faced with this, what should we do? Well, I told you not to do it in the first place, don't do it now.
That's a very good point. How different would things have been if they would have turned to God in prayer, Adam and Eve, in the midst of their temptation, instead of just giving in, yielding to the temptation. So this would be a very different place. And that shows that temptation is set forth for us to make a choice. And he is telling his disciples, you're going to face temptations here, and you're going to have to make choices. You got to pray that you enter not into these temptations. Verse 42 says, he said, Father, if it is your will, take this cup away from me. Now what's he talking about there when he refers to a cup? The crucifixion. And everything that's involved in it. Not just the physical pain and the torment, which would be part of it, but the fact that he would drink the cup of iniquity. In the Old Testament, symbolically, there was a cup full of iniquity, full of sin. And Jesus, when he would go through his suffering and go through the crucifixion, would be drinking that cup full of the sins of the whole world, full of my sins and your sins. And he's going to take upon himself that burden of sin. The Lord will lay upon him the sins and the iniquities of us all, Isaiah 53. It's prophesied some 700 years before his birth. And so he's going to take that cup, and he fully realizes what's about to happen. And so he asks it to be taken away from him. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. In other words, he's saying, I'm here to do your will. I don't want to go through this. I don't want to have to suffer for the sins of the world. But I know this is the only way. Not my will, but yours be done. And so he has a submissive attitude. He learned obedience through the things which he suffered. And therefore, he became the author of salvation to all those who obey him. Hebrews 5 and verse 9. So he is facing this terrible trial, and he's in agony in doing this. And remember from our passage that we read in Hebrews 5 and verse 7, it says of him that God heard him. God heard his prayer. And God said to his Son, no. You know, no to an answer, in answer to a prayer, is just as much an answer as yes. Some people think that if God says no to them, God didn't answer the prayers. Yes, he did. The answer is no. Because God knows what's best. And we have to realize that if God is going to say no to his own Son, his own perfect Son, who never sinned, who never violated his will, if he's going to say no to him, he's going to say no to us from time to time. Because we are far inferior than the Son, and we don't understand the big picture, and as a parent, you understand this. When your child wants to play with a knife, you tell them no. It doesn't matter how much they want to play with that knife. They don't understand the danger of it. But because we know more than the child, we say no. God knows more than the whole human race put together. He's all-knowing. And he will say no to certain things because it's not in our best interest. It's not his will. The key word there is, your will be done. We have to have that same attitude as Christ. Your will be done in all things. And that we have to have that submissive attitude. Verse 43, an angel appeared to him from heaven, strengthening him. I believe this may be the only reference to the angel coming in the Garden of Gethsemane. It's only from Luke that tells us that an angel did come and strengthen Christ. Angels were very much involved in the ministry of Christ. They were there at his birth. They were there involved throughout his ministry. I believe at the end of the 40 days of temptation, an angel came and strengthened him then. They're going to be at the resurrection. They're going to roll away the stone. They're going to be there at the ascension, as they are the two men who say, why are you looking up into heaven? He's going to come in like manner, Acts chapter 1. So angels are very much involved in the earthly ministry of Christ, and they certainly will be involved when he returns. 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, verses 7 through 9, Christ is coming back in flaming fire with his holy angels. So the angels are beings that are very much a part of God's scheme of things. Verse 44, being in agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling to the ground. We talked about this a few weeks ago, how that this is actually a medical condition known as hematidrosis, in which the blood will actually, the blood vessels within the sweat glands will burst and will mix with the sweat when a person is under a tremendous amount of stress, and they will sweat blood. And it is something that is indicates to us, verse 44, the amount of stress Jesus was under, and the fact that he started shedding his blood for us in the Garden of Gethsemane. This is before anyone ever touched him. This is before his arrest. Yet he knew what was coming. And as a result of that, he was under so much agony and so much distress over this that it caused him to sweat great drops of blood flowing to the ground. And this would also tell us later on that he would be in a very weakened condition for the rest of the trials and everything that he's going to endure. Yet he carried his cross to a certain distance and collapsed under its weight. He was a very strong, physically strong individual, but he is going through so much agony at this point that it's weakening him physically. That's why an angel had to come and strengthen him. And it's also very interesting that Luke, being a physician, is the only one that records this about Christ sweating blood. Matthew, Mark, and John don't record that. Luke, who was a physician by trade, did record that, of course, by inspiration. Verse 45, he rose from prayer, and he came to his disciples, and he found that they were sleeping from sorrow. They're not understanding what's going on. Verse 46, and he said to them, "Why do you sleep? Rise and pray, lest you enter into temptation." The same admonition he gave them in verse 40. Then verses 47 through 53, we have the betrayal and the arrest in Gethsemane. Verse 47, and while he was still speaking, behold, a multitude, and he who was called Judas, one of the 12, went before them and drew near to Jesus to kiss him. Now, Sunday morning, Lord willing, we're going to do a character study on Judas and what caused him to turn away, and the warning that we get from the life of Judas and the tragic end of Judas. So one of the 12 agreed to identify Jesus. Remember, it's dark, and it's going to identify him with a kiss. Verse 48, Jesus said to him, "Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss?" Now, it's not unusual that Judas, a man, would kiss Jesus, another man. That was a common greeting in the ancient world, and in some places of that same area today, it's a very common greeting for men to give one another a kiss. Romans 16:16, it talks about greet one another with a holy kiss before it talks about the churches of Christ. That's a regulation of a custom. Make sure your kiss is holy. And I think there might be a reason for that, saying you give a kiss of love in the New Testament epistles. You give a holy kiss because Judas here is giving Jesus an unholy kiss. He's identifying him. He's using a form of affection to betray his Lord. That's why he said, "Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss?" Verse 49, when those around him saw what was going to happen, they said to him, "Lord, shall we strike with the sword?" And one of them struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. But Jesus answered and said, "Permit even this." And he touched his ear and healed him. And Jesus said to the chief priests and the captains of the temple and the elders who had come to him, "Have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs? When I was with you daily in the temple, you did not try to seize me, but this is your hour and the power of darkness." So Judas identifies him with the kiss. This is the one, because there would be 12 men there which one. It's going to be dark, so you identify him with a kiss. Verse 49, you have those who are willing to defend their Lord. When those around him saw what was going on, they said, "Shall we strike? Is this the time? Are we about to go into battle?" This is the zeal they have, but it's not according to God's will. We learn from the other accounts, it's Peter who took the sword, who cut off the servant's ear. And it's out of zeal to protect his Lord, but that zeal is misdirected. Jesus said, "How can this?" In other accounts, he says, "How can the Scriptures be fulfilled? If you do this, if you prevent this from happening, how can the Scriptures be fulfilled?" He said, "Don't you know I can call 12 legions of angels to deliver me?" So Jesus made it very clear, I don't need your help. I can be delivered if I call to the Father and I want it to be delivered. Yes?
I think it's a misunderstanding of actually verse 36.
Mm-hmm.
Where you go back to that, it says, "But he said to them, But now let him who has a purse take it along, likewise also a bag, and let him who has no sword sell his robe and buy one." So they're thinking, okay, we're going to have a sword. We're going to be fighting.
Right.
So when this happens, they're like, okay,
This is the time to use.
Let's do it.
This is the time to use the sword, and it's a misunderstanding of that, and so many other things that they think, okay, this is the time we're going to go into battle now. This is the fight, and Jesus demonstrates what he preaches in verse 51. But he answered and said to them, "Permit even this," and he touched his ear and healed him. He loved his enemies. He did good to those who were there to arrest him, to take him to be killed. He didn't have to do that. He could have thought, well, that's good enough for him. He deserves that. No. He loved his enemies and therefore healed that man's ear that was cut. And it was something, when studying this, I'm thinking, this is something that we can do now with medical technology, but it takes months and months of recovery. It takes surgery. It would take a great deal of skin grafting, perhaps. Even with all of that, the ear wouldn't be perfectly normal because of the scarring. Jesus healed him instantly. No scarring, perfectly healed. You would think that would make an impression on those arresting him. That not only his kindness, but the fact that he picked up a severed ear and healed the man. And it was completely healed. So you never know. And I think that Peter in his zeal was really trying to go for the neck.
Did he actually pick the ear up?
Right. Whether he actually picked it up, I'm not sure in the other accounts whether it says it picked it up or not. The fact that he healed the man is the important thing. Completely and totally healed him. A miracle nonetheless. Yes, exactly. I mean, he did not even have to. I have to go back and look at that. He wouldn't have to even picked it up. He could have produced another ear. He multiplied the bread and the fishes. If anyone has a cross-reference on that, be sure and let me know. So he said, permit even this, verse 51, and he touched his ear and he healed him. Verse 52. Then Jesus said to the chief priests and the captains of the temple and the elders who had come to him, "Have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs?" You're coming out like I'm a dangerous individual. And he said, "I was with you daily in the temple and you did not seize me." And there were times we've read that they wanted to. He would make them so angry. Some of the things that he preached. Matthew chapter 23 is some of those sermons that were given, a sermon that was given that really condemned the leadership there in Jerusalem. And he said, "You had every opportunity to arrest me, but you didn't do it. But this is your hour, the power of darkness." In other words, this is evil at work. Remember, it says of Judas, Satan entered into him. He is working for the power of darkness now, and the power of darkness is at work. Verses 54 through 62, we have the prediction come true of Peter denying Christ. Verse 54, having arrested him, they led him and brought him into the high priest's house, but Peter followed at a distance. Notice he is following at a distance now. He's not up fighting, he's at a distance. Now when they had kindled a fire in the midst of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat among them. Verse 56, and a certain servant girl, seeing him as he sat by the fire, looked intently at him and said, this man was also with him. Verse 57, he denied him, saying, woman, I do not know him. Verse 58, and after a little while another saw him and said, you also are one of them. But Peter said, man, I am not. Verse 59. Then after about an hour had passed, another confidently confirmed, saying, surely this fellow also was with him, for he is a Galilean. But Peter said, man, I do not know what you are saying. Immediately, while he was still speaking, the rooster crowed. And the Lord turned and looked at Peter. Then Peter remembered the words of the Lord, how he had said to him, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. And he went out and wept bitterly. Can you imagine the chill going through? I mean, I get chills reading it. The chill going through Peter after he made that third denial. The rooster crowed, and then his Lord turned and looked at him. I mean, it's exactly what he said would happen. Came true. And this is a perfect example of Peter's weakness and how that Peter was a very weak individual at times. Now, he would be restored. He would come back. He would be a great man of God in the church, a great apostle, and would do great things. But he had this weakness here. And I think there's a lesson here for us as well. Remember what he said in verse 33 of Luke chapter 22. Lord, I am ready to go with you both to prison and to death. But then we find him in verse 54, he followed at a distance. Then we get through verses 56 through 61, he's actually denying Christ. You know, it's easy for us to assemble together in this building and to affirm our faith and to sing our faith in our songs and to pray and to draw strength from one another and edify one another, and that's what the purpose of assembly is, to do that. But the real test of whether we're a genuine follower of Christ comes on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. When we're with our co-workers, when we're with our classmates, when we're with our friends, when we are with our neighbors, when we are with our relatives who do not follow Christ. And those temptations and those peer pressures come upon us, will we deny Christ the way Peter did by our actions, by our compromise with the world? That's where the real test comes. And this was Peter's real test, and he failed it. But God's grace and mercy is there, and he is going to come back. He's going to come back from this. It says in verse 62, so Peter went out and wept bitterly. He betrayed his Lord. Do you realize that he betrayed his Lord just as much as Judas did? Now, Judas actually sold him out. But he betrayed his Lord just as much as Judas did. But both Peter and Judas dealt with their sins differently. Peter came back to the Lord. You remember in John's account, Jesus asked Peter, do you love me more than these? He asked him that 3 times after the resurrection. Do you love me more than these? Peter, do you love me? He asked him that 3 times. Why 3 times? Peter denied him 3 times. And so Peter came back to the Lord in humility. Judas, in sorrow, went out and committed suicide. Both of them we're going to see are sorrowful for what they had done, but both of them dealt with their sins differently. I am fully convinced that if Judas would have repented of his sins and came back, he would have been accepted just as much as the rest of them. However, the Scripture had already foretold that he would go out and hang himself. So God already knew what Judas was going to do. And so Judas did not deal with his sins properly, and Peter did. So we need to realize that the real testing of our faith is not here in the assembly, so to speak. It's when we get out in the world, whether we're going to be genuine followers of Christ or not. It's easy for us in a friendly environment like this to affirm our faith and to talk religiously and to talk about Christ. But what about when we get in the world? That's where the real testing comes. And sometimes we fail the test. Yes?
Sometimes also, when you look at what Peter was going through, here he's been with Christ all this time, and he's looking at it, he's still expecting the earthly kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's ready to fight, and Christ saying, no, let me go through this. And he is so confused as to what's going to happen. And the same things happen to us in this world.
Mm-hmm.
We expect things to go along and go certain ways, and all of a sudden it's not going the way we want. Life isn't heading the direction we want. Things get confusing, and instead of going back to prayer and going back to the Scriptures and back to the members of our family here in Christ, we turn away.
Exactly.
And I think that's a lot of what we look at here with Peter. He's like, I don't know what's going on. I know he's the Christ because he'd already said that. He knew he was the Son of God.
Mm-hmm.
But now it's like, I don't know what's happening.
Exactly. And he's confused about it, and it brings him, he's tempted to deny Christ. Remember what Jesus said, pray that you may not enter into temptation. That was an admonition for all the apostles, and then of course that would include Peter. And he's now being tempted to deny Christ, and he did deny him 3 times. Verse 63 through 65, you see some of the abuse that Jesus goes through. Now the men who held Jesus mocked him and beat him. And having blindfolded him, they struck him in the face and asked him, saying, Prophesy, who is the one who struck you? And many other things they blasphemously spoke against him. So here we have the physical abuse going on with Christ. They're beating him, they're blindfolding him, they're mocking him, saying, Prophesy. Tell us, you're blindfolded, we're going to hit you and abuse you now. You tell us who struck you. And to think about Jesus going through all that, Isaiah 53, again, predicting that would happen, that he would undergo severe mistreatment. And again, he is shedding forth that blood, the blood that's coming forth from him, that started in Gethsemane, is being beat out of him, quite literally. And it's for you, and it's for me, and it's for the whole world. For them to strike the Son of God, the one who created the heavens and the earth, and for him to take it, and for the Father to know about it. You know, if someone was hurting my children, how could you pull back and say, I'm not going to rescue them, as you see your child, your son, go through indescribable pain? I mean, we're seeing the love of God demonstrated here. Verses 66 through 71, as soon as it was day. Now this is taking place during the night, the arrest and all this. The elders and the people, and both the chief priests and the scribes, came together and led him into their council. Verse 67, saying, If you are the Christ, tell us. But he said to them, If I tell you, you will by no means believe. And if I also ask you, will you by no means answer me or let me go? Hereafter the Son of Man will sit at the right hand of the power of God. Then they all said, Are you then the Son of God? And he said to them, You rightly say that I am. And they said, What further testimony do we need? For we have heard it for ourselves from his own mouth. Now the proceedings that took place as far as arresting him at night, all of those things were illegal according to Jewish law. They were not only breaking the law of God by mistreating the Son of God, they were breaking Jewish law. You can't do that at night. And so the whole procedure was illegal, and there were various points in this proceeding that was illegal as far as the law of the land was concerned. So they bring them together in the council. If you are the Christ, tell us. How many times has Christ been confessed by his disciples, or he has been set forth as the Son of God by his signs and wonders and the things that he had done openly, proving himself to be the Christ? The word Christ there means anointed one. It's equivalent to the Hebrew Messiah. And Jesus said, If I tell you, you will by no means believe. If I tell you, you're not going to believe me. Verse 68. And if I also ask you, you will by no means answer me or let me go. There's nothing I can say, in other words, that is going to help this situation. Hereafter, the Son of Man will sit at the right hand of the power of God. So he is talking here about the tables being turned. Verse 69. The Son of Man is going to be at the right hand of the power of God. To be at the right hand of the power of God means you're ruling, you've got authority. And he says, from hereafter, after I go through this, things are going to turn around and the Son of Man is going to be ruling and reigning. Son of Man there is a term that you find in the book of Daniel, in which it is a messianic title. The Son of Man being presented to the Ancient of Days as he ascends in the clouds and giving authority and power and a kingdom to rule. So he is using Son of Man there, as he oftentimes referred to himself as a Son of Man, as a messianic title there. Verse 70, Then they said, Are you then the Son of God? And he said to them, You rightly say that I am. Now there are some people who are just, I guess the best way to say it is they're just ignorant of the Scriptures, who say that Jesus never claimed to be the Son of God. He never claimed that. Well, he did it on various occasions. He proved it. And right here before the council, he is saying to them, Yes, I am as you say. You rightly say that I am the Son of God. So not only is he the Son of Man, human, he's the Son of God. He's divine. Verse 71, they said, What further testimony do we need? For we have heard it ourselves from his own mouth. And the other parallel accounts say, We heard his blasphemy. For any man to claim to be God would be blasphemous under the law of Moses. But it would not be blasphemous for the one who truly is God to make a true statement about himself. And for him to claim to be the Son of God means that he is divine and he has authority. And they are seeing in him a fraud. They think he is just a troublemaker. They ignore his miracles that he's performed. They are enraged at his teaching because it's condemning them. And so they want him dead. They want him out of the way. And so when he makes the claim, I am the Son of God, they say we can get him with blasphemy. This is the charge that we can bring before him, blasphemy. Now, we're not going to get very far into chapter 23. But chapter 23, verses 1 through 5, we might look at verses 1 through 5 very quickly. I think next week we have singing. I think it's the last Wednesday night of the month. So we're going to have to skip again this class for our singing night. He is brought before Pilate. Pilate is the one who is making sure that there is peace in the province there in Jerusalem. It says, "Then the whole multitude of them rose and led him to Pilate. And they began to accuse him, saying, 'We found this fellow perverting the nation and forbidding to pay taxes to Caesar, saying that he himself is Christ, a king.' And Pilate asked him, saying, 'Are you the king of the Jews?' And he answered and said, 'It is as you say.' So Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowd, 'I find no fault in this man.' But they were more fierce, saying, 'He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, beginning from Galilee to this place.'" So they're bringing him to Pilate. Now remember, Palestine is under Roman rule. And under Roman law, no province of the empire, no nation that's under their authority can execute anyone. They are the ones that can execute. And therefore, they know they cannot execute him, so they got to take him to the Roman official here, Pilate, to see if they can get him to give the okay for the execution. And so here's the problem with this guy. Verse 2. "We found this fellow perverting the nation and forbidding to pay taxes to Caesar." That's just a lie. That's just a flat-out misrepresentation of what Jesus taught. What did Jesus say about paying taxes? "Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, render unto God the things that are God's." Remember, they already, in I believe it was Luke chapter 20, they presented that question to him, should we pay taxes to Caesar or not? And he said, yes, you render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, but you give to God what is God's. You render what is due to him. And so he didn't forbid paying taxes to Caesar, but they have to make that accusation against Christ because this makes Christ look like a rival to the Roman emperor. Is he going to be a king and rebel against the Roman Empire and break with the Roman Empire and try to throw off their shackles? And he's, verse 2, saying that he himself is Christ, a king. Now that part they got right, but they're misunderstanding that as well. They're thinking in earthly terms. And so when Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" he answered and said, "It is as you say. I am the king of the Jews." But not in the sense they understand it. Again, they're thinking earthly kingdom. And so, verse 4, Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowd, "I find no fault in this man." And several times throughout this chapter, we're going to see Pilate saying the same thing. I don't see anything wrong with him. I find no fault in him. And in verse 3, Pilate asked him saying, verse 5. But they were the more fierce, saying, "He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, beginning from Galilee to this place." Galilee was in the northern regions. Jerusalem was in the southern regions. From top to bottom, he's stirring up the people. In other words, they're leaving the impression with Pilate, he's causing an insurrection. He's going to cause an uprising against the Roman Empire. So you need to get rid of him. And that is the charges they're going to try to push upon Pilate to get him to release Jesus to be crucified. We will continue in 2 weeks our study of Luke. Be reading Luke chapter 23 and 24, which are the last 2 chapters of the book. And remember, if there's some subject you would like to study upon, write it down and put it in the box or give it to me.